I'm Alex Proyas, the director of The Crow. There are a lot of myths about the making of this film, and I don't see it as my role to systematically go through each of those and discuss them, but I feel that it does make sense to have some voice of logic in the wilderness discussing this movie. And for me, I've always the important thing is I've always wanted the film to be Brandon's film. At this stage, it's important that people get a bit of a sense of the reality of the making of the film. I think the time has come to sort of see a little bit of that, honouring his memory, basically. I think that's the most important thing. Oh, well, all the visual effects in this film were done very, very inexpensively. I mean, it looks like a miniature, but that's fine because I've never been scared of that. I actually like things that look like miniatures. It's all the little flames coming out, which we went to elaborate measures to project into the miniature set. We had we did several runs, and we had little screens set up so we could physically project into the miniature on multiple passes. Kind of really before, I mean, it was really the very early days of digital imagery, and we didn't really have the money to use them, so we tried to do things in much more of an optical way as much as possible. Ernie Hudson, I really felt that for that character there had to be a great deal of humanity, and Ernie is an actor whose work I was obviously aware of before The Crow, and he always struck me as someone who you instantly liked and you felt this great warmth for. As soon as he appears on screen, within a few seconds, you sort of want to go hang out in a bar with him and talk about old times, though you may never have met him before. And to me, that's really this very simple and the simple reason why he was cast. I think he just basically brought a great deal of humanity to the film. I think the film is about a bunch of bad guys being killed by a character who has all the trappings and the art direction of a bad guy himself. And I guess, early on I was just really looking for this sort of emotional through line and emotional hook to the characters in the movie. And obviously, Rochelle, the little girl, and Ernie's character were really important characters in that respect. They really gave the film some heart, basically.
I don't care what her name is. I didn't get the order to move it. Jesus, Albrecht. I can see why they took away your gold sheet.
Yeah, I wasn't a big enough asshole. Come on, let's go.
There is a big black bird in the movie, and it's called The Crow, and you'd think people would understand. I don't know, I think it's kind of it's a comic book thing, and I guess they always figured that the title should refer to the heroic character in the story, as comic book characters always do. But this is kind of an anti-comic book movie, or it's an anti-comic book, period, and it really does break a lot of the conventions that people have been conditioned to accepting through, the Supermans and the Batmans, etc. This is really trying to do something quite subversive in that genre, and part of that is this choice of title, I think.
And you're lying to me about Shelley. She's gonna die, isn't she?
Hey, it's okay. You'll be fine.
At some point just as we were in pre-production, I realised that this film was like the ultimate Gothic fantasy, as in terms of the goth subculture, I could be wrong, and maybe it's claiming more for the film than I should, but I sort of got the impression that this film was kind of instrumental in reviving the goth culture to a certain extent, because it was something that I mean, having, being someone who's been into music for a very long time now, I remember goths certainly in Australia and England being around in the early 80s. That's when the peak sort of impact of that sort of subculture hit England and Australia. In America, I wasn't really sure where they fit in. I was aware that they were around, but it seems like there's been this kind of rebirth of that. I know I'm seeing a lot more people on the streets, and that's fine because I think they look cool. So I really think that this had some impact on that. Once I sort of became aware of that, and I could see it so strongly in the styling of the comic books as well, we really went for it. I mean, we really pushed the film, stylistically, fashion and art direction-wise into that world, because I just thought it was not really hadn't really been done in movies that much,
What this place needs is a good natural...
I was working on the very early embryonic version of Dark City when I was made aware of The Crow, and I guess it wasn't. It certainly wasn't the Dark City script that I was working on at the time. Certainly was not the film that ended up being made. But I think there was a lot of cross-fertilisation between the two projects. If anything, I took the Crow story or the Crow world, the comic book, and sort of bent it somewhat into this other world that I'd already had been living in for quite some time, which is kind of the world of Dark City. And I think that's why the two films are so related, really,
Lake Erie actually caught on fire once from all the crap floating around in it. I wish I could have seen that.
I was involved with the film before we obviously had a cast and before Brandon was involved, but I believe that there had been some discussions with him at an early stage that I was not privy to. When he was put to me as a potential actor for this role, I instantly thought it was a perfect idea. This is the perfect person, and it's one of the few times that's actually happened. I think he lent this wonderful sort of poetry to the way he moved in not just in action sequences and in fight sequences, but in virtually everything he did in the movie. He really was an extraordinarily physically agile person, and so that just kind of rubbed off on every aspect of his performance. But he was, I think, very into the idea of amongst the carnage that's going on, to give this character a certain sense of beauty, just the way he moved. He was both frightening and beautiful at the same time, and part of how scary he was, what an incredible avenger he was in the film, was as a result of how fluidly he moved. It's something about never been able to outrun this character just because he would get from point A to point B so effectively. And that's really, this is all stuff that Brandon worked out. I mean, we talked about all this stuff, and he really worked very hard at the physicality of this character. He would look at the comic book and just the way the character would stand. And how in comic books, every moment in a comic book, because it's lovingly drawn by the artist, tends to be a sort of perfect physical moment. Everything is balanced just so, and we know that in a movie that's not often the case, but I think he really tried to bring that to that character so that whenever we saw him, he would be sitting in a certain way or moving in a certain way, and a great deal of thought had gone into his performance, which I really respected.
Damn it.
What was that?
You wait right here.
Be careful.
This was the backlot at Wilmington, North Carolina, Coralco Studios. And, I mean, it's a mixture of things. Like this scene, for example, where he's climbing the rooftop. This whole rooftop set was built on a soundstage. But the street that you just saw with Ernie Hudson running down the street was the back lot. But we changed it quite a lot. It was, it's been used for a few films. I mean, it was kind of interesting because during us shooting The Crow, we finished the back lot work fairly early on, and the Coen brothers shot Hudsucker Proxy on that same back lot. And I remember walking back onto the back lot towards the end of our filming, and suddenly the whole place had been transformed from sort of a ghetto in Detroit City to this wonderfully, beautifully pristine, clean, sort of every town kind of place. And that's the wonder of the filmmaking process. People can reuse the same thing and dress it in their own way. Both The Crow and Dark City are about a sort of a man lost in the city. That is definitely a recurring theme. And I don't know, maybe it's partly it's the way I feel about the city. I feel it's a place that you can sort of lose your way in. And I think a lot of people spend their lives living in a city trying to kind of, whether they realise it or not, trying to fit in or structure their lives around the structure that is imposed upon them. And it's a very artificial structure. It's not, I guess, the way human beings were designed to function. And so I guess that's partly my fascination. It's a very personal thing. I don't really know exactly why I'm so obsessed with the idea of cities at night, but I'm aware of my obsession now after having made a few films that deal in that sort of in that world. The Crow really invented the genre of the leather-clad hero, the trench-coated leather-clad hero, which has been used in many films since. Blade is one that springs to mind, and the whole the leather coat that Brandon wears in the movie it wasn't really a part of the comic book. It came out of us trying to come up with a contemporary version of like Batman's cape. If Batman really was able to walk down a street in Detroit, what would he actually really look like? He wouldn't be wearing a goofy thing, like helmet with pointy ears and a cape. I mean, we never wanted to sort of to go along that sort of path. So we really decided that the leather trench coat was kind of the urban equivalent, the modern equivalent, I suppose. And so his whole physicality, his whole costume came out of what he would find, what he would, if he had to wrap because if he'd been slashed by a knife, he'd have to wrap his arm in duct tape or to physically keep his costume together. If it had been shot out or whatever, he'd just wrap string or duct tape around him. And Brandon really got into the whole idea of creating his own costume. He got the elements, but then he wanted to be the one to wrap the duct tape around him. He didn't want some art director or costume designer to do that. He wanted to be, it had to curl in a certain way because his character, he was the guy who would have done it in reality. So all that sort of stuff. I mean, that level of detail, the bullets in his hair, which you never see in the film. He's got little bullet casings in his hair, just tied to his hair. He wrapped that, he tied that to his hair, and just all that sort of stuff. I think is incredible detail, and that really comes from Brandon. I mean, to me, it was like the first time I saw the character. in a trench coat and with his makeup on. He looked cool. He looked great. I really liked it. But he was never happy with just leaving it at that level. He wanted to sort of push it further, basically. So, yeah, getting the makeup looking right was actually really, really difficult. And I remember the first few times that Brandon and I looked at it, we were both very unhappy with it. It was really hard to get that to a point where it didn't feel self-conscious. And Brandon and I both became happy with it when it was distressed. We always used to say how the time it looked the best is at the end of a shooting day, when he'd been rained on and he almost like wanted to sleep in the makeup and then arrive on the set the next day, and that's when it would look really great. Because when he first applied it, and he was really against, there was a makeup artist involved, of course, but he was really involved with like redoing it and futzing with it and just trying to make it look really raw, like his character would have, the way that his character would have applied it in a highly emotional state. So the rougher it was, the happier we were with it. We never called him the Crow. We never referred to him as the Crow. So we never even really thought of the makeup as being the Crow, because he bases it on a drama mask. I wanted the movie to be black and white, with blood and fire being the only key elements. So it's black and white and red are the three colours. And occasionally there'll be a pair of blue jeans in there that sort of slip through, but mostly we sort of stuck to that palette. And it was just really keeping the wardrobe department and the art department under that basic concept. There's no blues. I think the palette was no blues and greens in the film. We desaturated the colour just with art direction. We did it with art direction because, again, we couldn't afford... We were doing all this stuff before there was actually ways of doing it. Now there's like so many great techniques that you can do this stuff with, bleacher bypassing, etc. Well, it's not the first time anyone did this stuff. I mean, obviously, it's a great device in that if you can publish several rules to give to everyone who's involved with the film, you'll be amazed at how stylistic a film ends up looking. If you just say to the crew that there will be no green on this set, no one can use green, it forces people. It's the very simple rules to remember under the sort of the stress and the workload of making a film. So often those simple rules are the best ones to adopt. I was really concerned about the simplicity of the story, but it seemed like people got off on this sort of episodic set-piece kind of quality that it has, and I think if each set piece works, people seem to go with that, The aspect of the film that was most important is Brandon's character and us sympathising with him, and it was really tough to finish the film in a way that I was confident it would have that aspect, because that to me was always the key. Is if you like this guy and you really were on side with him emotionally, you would want to see him track these guys down one at a time and do away with them. And I was never really confident that we had established that clearly enough, but it seems that Brandon brought so much to each scene, even while he was killing bad guys, that the audience really did start to identify with him and sympathise with him. It's a very interesting story about Lawrence in this fight scene that's coming up, which is that I remember this really distinctly. He was really concerned about ending up in the water, in this puddle of water, because he has apparently, or had at the time apparently, a bit of a water phobia. And so we were doing the scene where he had to end up virtually being drowned in this puddle of water by or his character ends up almost being drowned by Eric Draven. And it was quite tricky to shoot with someone who's scared of water, I can tell you. We realised that he was discovering his powers in this scene. He was kind of elated at the same time as trying to get this guy and kill this guy, but he's kind of almost elated to be alive again, and not only that, but to have these extraordinary abilities now. So it was difficult to balance both of those things, but I think Brandon found the balance, and just the shot where he lands on the ground and you focus in on him and he's laughing at how kind of strangely, perversely wonderful the situation that he's found himself in. It's kind of it's sort of a lunatic asylum laugh, but there is some joy in there as well at the fact that he has come back as this immensely powerful creature. In this particular instance, and generally with Brandon in this film, he really he was driving a lot of the time. The other actors had an enormous respect for him physically and his fighting, and there was, it's his his pedigree. I mean, he's whoop anyone's ass basically. So to a certain extent, and that's the role that he's playing in these scenes, he's in control, and for me the fun of it was to see what craziness Brandon had come up with, and he came up with some really off-the-wall stuff, because having, watched his fair share of action movies and having been involved with his fair share of action movies, he was trying to push the language of that a little bit, and trying to just make it original, and so that was the joy of it, is to see what he'd come up with. And obviously then I'd often tailor something in a certain way if I couldn't shoot it, or we didn't have enough time to do something in a certain way. No, it was a great experience in that respect. There were conflicting forces going on, because we were watching John Woo movies at the same time as, and watching like some great Chinese sort of fantasy movies as well, where there was a lot of wire work and all that. I think part of the thing is we couldn't afford to do wire work. We may have done more if we actually had the time to shoot it, because it is quite time consuming. But I think both he and I wanted it to feel kind of raw and almost documentary in a way. I was aware of the Warriors and David Patrick Kelly's wonderful performance in that film, and so I was really pleased when he was suggested as someone for this film. He originally read for Top Dollar, in fact, and was pretty great as Top Dollar. And for a moment, I was in a difficult situation, because I really wanted to have Michael Wincott in the film as well. And it took a little bit of convincing to get David to do T-Bird, but he came around. He found something great in that character and really went for it. Bai Ling just basically came in and read for us. I had not seen any of her work at the time, and she was, she did a great job. She was scary. She really was. She created a wonderfully kind of perverse character. And actually seeing this after all this time is, it really did work. They're the most bizarre couple you would possibly imagine. Originally they were kind of seen much more as a brother and sister, and I guess there's it's a little hard to believe that they would ever be a brother and sister now, but we just felt that it was the perfect combination. Violence is a very overused, but very obviously extremely powerful way to affect an audience. When we were trying to think of the ultimate thing the ultimate expression of these characters' perversity, we had to really stretch ourselves to a certain extent, and that's what we came up with. It's purely the concept that is what is so frightening. I think the original concept in the screenplay was that he is there to fight for revenge, for justice. He's not there to do anything else. And if he chooses to become involved with the living or to help the living in any way, his powers will be taken away from him. So this whole subplot with the little girl and her mother were instrumental in expressing that idea. But that part of the film kind of was excised, but I still think that subplot is actually quite relevant because it is again partly the soul, the heart and the soul of the film. And I think both of those characters, Darla and the little girl, are bring a lot to that in that respect. It wasn't upmost in my concerns to create a franchise, but I was aware of the fact that it could possibly do that, and I mean, you certainly don't want to make that impossible. It would have been kind of naive not to. You could see all the elements there, If it was ever going to survive as a franchise, it certainly needed those things to. I mean, if Eric Draven was going to come back again, as he undoubtedly would have, there had to be some layers to it. There had to be some reason for him to come back. Look, if things had turned out otherwise, I would have probably been delighted to be making The Crow 2. It would have been terrific, and I think, if Brandon had been involved with that, we would have, made a great movie,
I'm looking for something in an engagement ring. Gold.
You're looking for a coroner.
Oh, he was so fast. Brandon was like, he moved between frames, and it was quite amazing to see him on the set because, in a film you assume that there's some sort of trickery involved at times, and, he did things that you just could not believe were actually happening in front of you. Like that shot just there where he throws himself up off the counter. Doesn't seem like much, but even just that, in the time that he does it, I mean, he would probably win an Olympic event making that little jump up there, And that's him, it's not it's not a double or anything. It's he's doing all this stuff. I love seeing the guy. I think he's great to watch, and to a certain extent, I'm making room to show him off, Because it's his movie, There's no question about that, and he was a star who hadn't really. It was the weirdest thing. It's like you're making a film with a major star who isn't really a star at the stage that you're making the film, but it's there. It's on the film, and it was just trying to sort of showcase this incredible talent.
What the hell do you call that?
I call it blood, Detective.
I suppose you write it up as graffiti.
You can leave my crime scene now. Okay?
In the comic book, he ends up talking in poetry most of the time. He actually doesn't he doesn't convey any real information as a character in the comic book. Quite often he will just kind of waltz through a scene and recite poetry as he kills people. And so we wanted to give that sort of quality to his character. But obviously he's a far more rich and complex character in the movie than he was in the comic book. And it was trying to balance that stuff with the reality, the real emotion that he was supposed to be feeling. We liked that aspect of the comic book, but it was also, if handled badly, could have been really, really not worked at all. So it was kind of I think it was Brandon trying to find sort of a balance with what he was doing.
I love you.
Yeah. Brandon has a very specific way of having this character speak. And I think a lot of that comes from the inspiration of the comic book character.
Now you're going to tell me where to find the rest of Tintin's little party pals.
This is a great scene. He's so good in this scene. And Polito's good too.
Upstairs, all right?
Fun boy.
A whole jolly club. Jolly pirate nickname.
But this was a really important scene for his character because it really is. It's about his lost love. It's about his girlfriend, and the whole focus of the scene is to find that ring, to get that ring, and it is really a very strong scene for him.
Death is coming.
One of my proud bits in that scene was the rings coming out of the shotgun, which again we did in a very low-tech way. We basically cut. There's no digital effects in there at all. It's a straight cut to some oversized rings that are basically being air cannoned towards camera. Actually, no, they're being dropped towards camera through a puff of smoke, and that's all it is. And the way it's cut, you really feel like you're seeing rings, a bunch of rings that have been poured into a shotgun flying out towards you. But it's again the cheapest and simplest effect imaginable. That's a dummy. We only hold the shot for a very short amount of time because it's really obvious. Any more frames and you would have seen him wobbling in the explosion, which wouldn't have been very. I think the close-up is sort of overused in movies too. I feel that sitting back from something sometimes is just as emotional as punching into a big close-up, and I like actors' physicality. I like to see the way they walk and the way they move. And, a lot of the times when you want to see that, you tend to pull back and sort of see the relationship of the environment they're in. And, I like environments. I like rooms and places. And I think it's important to see how people relate to those rather than just being tight on someone's face all the time, The film was shot by Dariusz Wolski, who I'd had a long working relationship with over the years. We'd first met several years earlier when we were working on music videos together. I seem to remember us shooting the entire movie through either a heavy blue or a heavy orange filter, and then taking that bias in the film out in the printing. What that did is it resulted in bleaching the colours, and all the colours that were really left were the reds that we were after, the fire, the blood in the film.
He died a year ago.
That's actually James O'Barr there, the looter.
They're all
yeah.
just don't know
Yeah, he got a television, a slightly shop-soiled one. Yeah, we did this 360-degree Steadicam shot to show that that Eric has gone. And it's it's partly me showing off the fact that we had a lovely backlot that at our disposal. I never had been able to shoot on a backlot before, and we had full control of this environment. So I sort of wanted to sort of see the whole thing for a moment. This was a way of doing it. Alex McDowell was the production designer on The Crow, and we really were at the mercy of a B-grade movie budget. Like this set, for example, was I think he worked wonders. We shot in a disused cement factory, and he added windows and walls and trying to create this space. But my God, actually shooting in this environment was a nightmare, because this was up about 6 flights of stairs, this particular set, so everything had to be craned or carted up into this set, and it was the middle of winter and it was frighteningly cold. So again, what I would have loved to have done is to have built this and probably built it better on a soundstage, but we just did not have the luxury of doing that.
I didn't have nothing to do with that.
Oh, sure, you must be awful disappointed.
I got trouble. One of my crew got himself perished.
Yeah, and who might that be?
Somebody stuck his blades in all his major organs in alphabetical order.
Well, gentlemen, by all means, I think we ought to have...
It's interesting to know that rooks, ravens and crows are all considered crows, in fact. But what I glean from spending a lot of time with the birds on this production, so to speak, was that the ravens that we ended up using in the film are actually slightly bigger than crows, and apparently a lot more intelligent and a lot more trainable, which is why whenever you see a crow in a movie, chances are it's probably a raven, in fact. These shots you see of the crow flying, we shot miniature scenes, and then we shot a series of angles of the birds that were ravens, in fact, not crows, against green screen, and we had them we basically had set up these big E fans to create wind so they could actually hover in the wind, and we could get static shots of them, and then we'd get the trainers to make them duck and dive and move around a little bit. When I first saw one of the birds actually hovering in one of these big fans, I went, great, this is going to work terrifically well. But unfortunately what happens is that they never flap their wings, because as soon as they flap their wings, they will move out of the wake of the air coming at them, and they're actually smart enough to know that, which I find intriguing. So it was we had a really hard time trying to make them seem like they were doing anything other than hovering over the city, and I really wanted them to fly as much as possible. But I think we cheated our way around that mostly. My tastes are always to remain for the story to remain a little transparent, not to hit the audience over the head constantly with exposition. And The Crow, like any film, I mean, I feel it's a very simple story. People get it. You know, I remember the very first test screenings we had. 2 or 3 people in an audience out of 300 or whatever it was would ask, why is it that Eric Draven is the guy who can come back with these powers? Why is it that he can come back from the dead? And our distributors at the time treated this very seriously, and I'm going, who the hell cares? And that was only 3 people out of 300, so it means the rest of them didn't really care, And I remember this was a really big thing for everyone at the time, but now seeing the movie, it's obviously ludicrous, and it's a suspension of disbelief, and people go with it. Why not, is what I would say to that question.
I'm cool.
You didn't get that file from me, okay? And don't tell me you owe me one.
I owe you one.
Yeah, right.
Damn.
Funboy was originally conceived of as Iggy Pop, and I think he was basically drawn as Iggy Pop even way back in the comic books. I think we may have actually not offered the film so much to him, but tried to convince him to be in the first movie at one point. But we weren't really in budget range where we could actually do that sort of thing, By this stage of the movie, he's extremely confident in his ability to dispense with these guys, and he's being playful. He's going insane. I mean, as a character, he's kind of going a little nutty, as you probably would do if you were in this situation. And his way of dealing that is to almost become childlike and to, look through the hole in your own hand that has just been shot through. And again, it's just, the only way he can sort of deal with the situation, he's dealing with madness, he's dealing with these characters who are insane in their own way, is to fight, fire with fire. There was quite a prolonged scene here of a fight between Eric and Funboy. That's not the end of Funboy there. Funboy actually comes back in the original cut of the movie and snorts a copious amount of speed or cocaine or some sort of substance, and with that fights his own pain of having been shot through the leg and actually attacks Eric with a razor and does in fact inflict some damage. to him, partly because Eric has just done something for Darla, has helped Darla, and that's when he's in a weakened state. We cut the scene for many reasons, the subsequent scene with Funboy and Eric, partly because it wasn't ever really clear in the movie, this whole conceit of if Eric does something for the living, he is weakened, his powers are depleted. That was never really made clear. And so I felt that it was actually confusing to have a situation here where Funboy can actually inflict damage on him. The other reason is partly because we had so little time to shoot the fight scene between Funboy and Eric that Brandon and I, neither of us were particularly happy with the results. We both felt that it was the coverage wasn't right, and we never really got it to work in the way we'd done it. He had choreographed a really beautiful sequence, and I just hadn't been able to capture it in the time that we had. So for those reasons, we decided to remove that scene. No, we had 2 cameras for a lot of the time. That scene may not have, because again, this is going back to relying on memory, and it's getting a little hazy, but I seem to remember that the second camera would often go off to do insert shots or pickups of some sort, and so that they would not always be with us. So I seem to remember in that particular fight scene I think we had 1 camera, which is probably the result of the lack of coverage. Look, I'd prefer to definitely work with 1 camera if I actually had the time to do that. 2 cameras are a lifesaver in situations where you're running out of time. You can, within 1 take, you can knock off a scene, or not 1 take, but 1 setup and a second camera running beside you. So they can speed up things enormously. And so I would always carry a second camera with me unless I ever got to the point in my career where I could actually have as many days I wanted to shoot a movie.
How long would you like to take?
Until it's finished. I think that would be the best world to be in. When it's finished, it's finished. What more can I say?
But you're so meticulous. I can imagine this taking 2 years.
No, I wouldn't abuse my power too much. I would just a little bit, perhaps.
If I wanted ice, I would ask for ice. Now fill it up.
Fill it up yourself, macho man.
I really need you.
This is Tony Todd, who was cast in the role of Grange. It's sort of an interesting flip side in some ways to he's the chief top dollar henchman in many ways, and it's an interesting sort of flip side to the core group of people that Eric Draven has surrounding him. And in fact, I think I remember having seen Candyman and really enjoyed Tony's performance in that film. And perhaps I think the real decision to cast Tony was actually when I met him, rather than so much the work that I'd seen him in, because there was this wonderful stillness about him, and some of that came across in his work. But I really saw Grange as being this incredibly not passive. That's not the right word, but he doesn't have to do much. His energy and his tendency to violence is like below the surface. I had to really struggle to convince Ernie Hudson to do this in underwear and a hat. He really did not want to do it. He just thought it was really dumb. And that's kind of what I liked about it. I like the fact that there's this cop who is like, who's come home and he's actually forgotten to take his hat off, and he's like stripped down to his to his underwear. But it took some convincing to get him to do it, but I'm glad he did.
Don't ever do that, man.
Good likeness.
I saw your body, man.
He gets to take it off, yeah. We didn't make him do the whole scene that way.
You still have your hat on.
I gotta sit down. Shit. Holy shit. Say.
He's kind of an empath, and he can absorb pain from people and objects, I think, as well. I think, and we had this flashing concept, which the images sort of flash at you, which has also become a sort of device now. It's a convention, which I'm pretty sure we invented, the whole thing of visualizing this sort of, you know, absorption of emotions or pain in that way. Yeah, he manages to absorb this stuff and then to give it back to the man who was the cause of it. But, you know, for me, it's kind of, again, it's like an unexplained part of the film, and it's kind of why I like it, because it's, you know, if a major studio had made this film, we would have had some convoluted explanation for why this was occurring, and we don't even bother, you know.
I saw her through your eyes. You stayed with her the whole time.
Yeah, well, you gotta understand something, all right?
Yeah, in this scene, you see the slashes in Eric's coat that Funboy made in the previous scene that was removed. Funboy slashed him with the razor, and that's why they're there. But you don't, in the context of this cut, you don't really know where they came from. He's been through a lot by now, you know. I mean, I think I explained it to myself when we removed that scene as, oh, maybe that happened when he stepped through the plate glass window or something. Who the hell knows, you know. Brandon's wardrobe was really quite fabulous for this movie, because I don't know how many coats we had. I think we probably had about 20 of them. Because obviously when the film is shot out of sequence, as all films are, he goes through every scene Brandon goes through, his wardrobe is distressed further and further. Everything he walks into, he comes out of with more slashes and cuts and whatever. And so to do that, we had many stages of the coat that we would have to be careful of which one he was wearing for which particular scene. It was kind of a little bit of a struggle to keep up with, you know, where we were at there. And ironically, you know, you cut one scene as we did, and all the logic goes out the window.
I'm sorry as hell for what happened to you and your girlfriend.
Yeah.
I got stabbed. I shot the son of a bitch. I watched the bullet hole close by itself. And then my business gets blown up real good.
I mean, you want to see these guys get it, you know. I think it's the function of a revenge movie is you want to see the people who have inflicted so much pain get their comeuppance, and that's why we enjoy this sort of macabre genre. And so the nastier these guys can be, the more pleasurable it is when Brandon's character appears and deals with them. And it's also fun to see them. I mean, it's all about fun. I enjoy seeing these kind of badder than bad people kind of being badder and worse to each other. I think it's so over the top and crazy that you kind of you derive some strange pleasure from it.
You know, you're directly out of your fucking mind. You know that?
Yeah,
I see. It's one of the most important things I learned from my sister.
Sister? She's supposed to be your sister?
My father's daughter. That's right. What's the matter? You don't see the resemblance? Well, let's take it from the top, Red. Got a lot of detail. What do you say?
He had a bird with him. Nearly pecked my face off. He told me to tell T-Bird that death was on its way, whatever the fuck that means. And Draven. He said his name was Eric Draven. Want to relax that thing down?
Yeah, I think David Scow has got a real talent for writing the best one-liners. You know, he's often his scenes are structured with these one-liners, and again, it's like pushing the sort of genre to an interesting place. I mean, the sort of quirky, you know, witty one-liners kind of by this stage, you know, I guess they became common in the 80s, in 80s action movies. But really kind of the concept of like almost constructing entire scenes out of nothing but one-liners is really something that I think Scow pioneered in many ways.
For fuck's sake, die, will you? Give me that thing.
Thanks.
Yeah, there's some funny stuff, and everyone got into the style of this and really went for it, and there were some really cute things that came out of that.
I'll have the janitor come on up.
Eric Draven was first conceived as, in the comic book, as a, I guess, as a handyman, and so we decided to change him into a guitarist because I felt that to justify the use or even overuse of loud rock and roll in the movie, there had to be some reason for doing that, and this was the best one I could come up with at the time. So that was definitely a decision that I imposed on the film. Yeah. Oh, the old LP. Yeah. It was actually old-fashioned even in those days, but I have this sort of, you know, perverse fascination for old technology, and I hate computer screens in films, and I even find CDs and even like modern phones kind of an intrusion on the story. I find them very kind of sterile. You know, I like old technology because I like wheels that turn and lights that flash. You know, I think that's all really cool stuff, and it seems like technology is sort of too clean and too antiseptic these days. So, you know, in this film is very subtly a period film. I mean, it's not exactly a modern day film. I mean, seeing it now, you don't really get that, but at the time there were a lot of anachronisms, and it kind of just it allows you to sort of create your own universe rather than sort of conforming with the world that really is out there.
Smokes and rolls.
Yeah, originally in this scene, Skank is sees T-Bird being taken away by Brandon's character, and he runs. He wants to go and help, but these two kids come in and hold up the store, and this was like one of the key scenes that we had to drop for ratings reasons, because it was it broke the law that says you can never have kids brandishing weapons in a movie, in an American movie. And to me, it was just so over the top that it was actually kind of funny that these like little kids come in and sort of mess up this sort of, you know, hoodlum's life, and actually, in fact, the scene ended up with him being shot in the arm as a result. It was actually, I always found it amusing, but I guess a lot of people don't share my sense of humour.
What do you want, man? Money? Drugs? I got it. I can use you. You did Tintin. This is business, right?
Bastard.
The interesting thing about this car chase is that most of it's done with miniatures. Most of the shots of the cars driving down alleyways, and some you can tell more than others, like that's a miniature shot there. That's real. That's a miniature. And a lot of times you can really tell. And again, it was kind of a stylistic decision, but it was also the fact that I didn't have enough money to shoot a car chase, and the street that we had in Wilmington, the backlot, was just not big enough to stage a car chase. The cars could barely get up to speed before they'd have to slow down before hitting the styrofoam wall at the end of the set. So really the only way of getting them all up to speed was to shoot the occasional wide shot in as a model. And you kind of get away with it, I suppose. It was interesting to see, though, like I remember specifically one of the Batman movies that came in the wake of The Crow. I can't remember which one it was. They kind of reproduced a lot of these angles, but for real. They actually did it with real cars, and it's quite amusing to see this, what we had sort of done for budgetary reasons was sort of used as a stylistic flourish on a grand scale in a really expensive movie. Yeah, it cuts around really quickly, and some of the miniature shots, if you blink, you miss them. But yeah, in that particular crash sequence, there were one or two miniature shots. I remember when we crashed those cars, they didn't slide as far as I wanted them to, and we couldn't afford to do a second take. So my way of fixing that was to shoot the actual slide in miniature, and cut that into the middle of the sequence, so it actually looked like the cars slid a lot further than they actually did. No. It was really just desperation more than sort of planned. More than planning. It was just how do you pick up the pieces and make something work when you didn't have the money to get it right the first time round.
What? What do you want? What is it? What? Speak to me. Speak. Did you send us these complaints? Come here. Abashed, the devil stood. Does it get you sweating? I know you. I know you. I knew you.
There's literally no CGI in the entire movie. It's all done in there are a few digital shots, but there's no real. I mean, I guess the only CGI we had really was probably the wound healing, but that's a real. Well, it's not a real car. It's actually a fiberglass shell over a chassis, and like so many of the action sequences in the film, it didn't really work in the way it was intended, and again, due to lack of budget and time, and the car actually does a flip, which was never really intended. It was designed to sail probably about 100 metres out into this lake, and it sort of basically blew up as soon as it came off the dock, which was substantially earlier than I wanted it to. And fortunately, the cameramen who were on all the cameras were quick enough to manage to capture it, because I don't know what we would have done. I think we would have been doing another miniature shoot at that stage if that hadn't been grabbed on the day. That shot, the bird shot in the flaming silhouette shot, was actually done for real. That actually worked magnificently well when we shot it. It was a groove cut into the ground, a very thin groove with a very small amount of some sort of inflammable liquid, and it was basically lit, and it actually worked, surprisingly, for the first take.
This is the 7 a.m. edition of Action News. For over a decade, the night before Halloween has had a darker and deadlier nickname in the inner city, Devil's Night, the name given to what has become an annual plague of arson. Last year, 200 individual blazes were reported and 11 people lost their lives.
But no, Anna was just a great sort of... there's a sort of, vulnerability. I mean, saying it's a vulnerability is almost a cliche, I suppose, but there is this wonderful tenderness about her character, and I think that's really what appealed to me. I mean, again, it's like, what her character is doing in this film kind of really sucks big time. She's not someone that anyone in their right mind would actually warm to, but you do because of the way she's played. That was really down to Anna pulling that off, really, because that's really kind of one of those roles you read on the page and you go, well, how will we ever invest any emotion in this character? But I think somehow she made it work. A lot of the times I'm doing things that I don't even actually realise I'm going for what feels right, and I don't realise exactly why I'm doing that, but there seems to be some logic to why I'm doing it, and I often see that afterwards. And so often the actors push you into a certain way of doing things. I remember when I first started as a filmmaker, because I was always into composition and framing, I would try and impose on the actors where they should stand and what they should do. I really didn't understand that that's not really the way to work with actors. And it always felt uncomfortable for me if an actor suggested that perhaps they move 3 steps rather than 2 steps in a scene, and because I would play it all out in my head before I arrived on the set, and I would feel that it should be done exactly in that way, and things were storyboarded accordingly. But obviously, you realise over the years that that's not the most effective way of doing it. So I tend to go from a very structured way of composing and framing, and it's usually with things that I can predict, not the actors. If it's an action sequence, you have to structure very, very tightly because you can predict what's going to happen. With the actors, you can never do that, and in fact, not being able to predict what they're doing is the whole key of capturing something terrific. So then I tend to use more psychological methods with the actors. I tend to, if I want them configured in a certain way for a shot for an emotional reason, I will almost design the set to force them to stand in a certain place. So they kind of feel like they're making all their own decisions, but perhaps I'm having something to do with those decisions. Convincing people that Shelley is the love of Eric's life is, I don't know that we managed to be completely convincing with that. We had very little material to work with. We had very little stuff at our disposal. And this was a part of the movie for me that was the most difficult in many ways to achieve, because it's, in the comic book, it's so broad and it's so extreme, but it kind of has to be because, again, it's like the whole through line of this character. It's why he's doing what he's doing, and it was tough to convince. I don't know that I'm fully convinced when I see the film in those very quick flashes and those little images that there is this totally real emotional relationship between those two characters. And I just think it's partly just a lack of material, really. We shot a lot of scenes between Eric and Shelley where there was more prolonged dialogue scenes, but partly we tried to improvise scenes, and I feel that in some ways we should have probably structured them more specifically. I was trying to find some reality between those two characters, and I never really found it. That we needed a little more time to get that to work, So she is kind of the substitute in many ways. She's a substitute for Shelley. She's the one that sort of takes on the story in that respect. That does work. That Sarah really is the emotional hook, and it really is where we get a sense of Eric's relationship to another person, and that works. And it's a testament to Rochelle's acting. I think she really managed to, she's doing scenes where she was actually on alone. She wasn't really. This particular scene was actually not shot with Brandon. This is one that was not, and it was always designed to be shot with him, and he was going to be more involved in that sequence, and we had to. It was a really important sequence to the emotion of his character, and now I had to stage this scene with this little girl without Brandon, and that was really tough to pull off, and I'm amazed that she managed to make it work, because it was really just down to her to making it work.
Get so lonely all by myself. The hell with you. I thought you cared.
Sarah, I do care.
That's him. That's him. But he look different.
Angel is great. He gets beat up a lot. He's like the Peter Lorre of the movie. It's like the guy everyone is abusing, and he's like stuck between there's a meat in the sandwich, I think, and it's great. It's again, I get immense pleasure out of seeing what he does. I find it really funny and really entertaining, and I think he was born to to play that character.
It's not fair. It's Fun Boy's fault. That boy was out of control. T-Bird, he came in, he said, raise them both, and now this goat gonna kill my ass next. This ghost's gonna kill my ass next. This ghost's gonna kill me.
Hey, it ain't no ghost.
They have all arrived.
Watch him. We might need him.
Go kill my...
He like his plain with onions.
Why was the cat at the hot take stand? There had to be a really good reason for me to put a cat in a scene. It had to be a really important reason, because otherwise it would not have been there. I guess she took it. I can't really even remember now, but I guess Sarah takes the cat or something. I'm not sure. We never see it. Cats are not known for their cooperation. It's like squirming all over the place. It's like, every cut you cut back to it and it's doing something different. And I think the trainers probably had it tied down at one stage so it wouldn't keep moving. So God knows what the thinking was. I don't think there was anything changed or removed at that stage. So you got me. The use of music in the film was very important in terms of the use of rock and roll music. Really, I think The Crow pushed this idea of using rock and roll songs as the soundtrack. That was my intention. It was, for me, the score was kind of almost incidental and irrelevant to the movie. I wanted to drive every scene with a song, but with a song that was not there for a marketing reason to sell a soundtrack album. It was there because it was an integral part of the flavour of the movie, This one really seemed to work for this particular sequence. And it was obviously, from the long version of the shootout, it was obviously used a lot more than we ended up using it, because it was just designed to just be completely manically aggressive and crazy, and I think they did that rather well. Thrill kill cult, as we affectionately knew them. I think this is a great song. I think it's crazy. This sort of, the location actually allowed me to do shots like this occasionally. This shot would have taken forever to set up, but we actually had a pit directly above the this set that would take you up to the next level of this factory. And so we could actually point cameras down there and do shots very simply through there. And we also allowed us to rig. You can see the pit there, rig and light from up there. So it actually that was the one part of this location that was reasonable to shoot in. But apart from that, it was a nightmare.
Start a bunch of fires, make a little profits.
I like the pretty lies.
There's this very subtle kind of I always used to refer to this film as a Western, and there is this sort of Western thematic thing going on. The Skull Cowboy was obviously a very strong aspect of that, which was removed, so that part of it went. The whole kind of Indian folklore was obviously an influence. But I sort of saw this place as kind of a frontier town, and if there was any genre that I had on the back of my mind, it was really the Western more than any other thing. And I guess some of that started rubbing off on some of the wardrobe. Obviously, everyone wanted to wear long black leather coats in this film, and it was trying to find some spin on that would work for everyone's character. And I guess with Top Dollar, it kind of was skewed a little in that direction. When he's sitting on that fire escape, you really can see it. It's a frame that's come alive out of the comic book, and Brandon really did want to give his character that grace, And I mean, it's also us reacting to other films that were around at the time, reacting against them. And I guess, we'd never really seen a comic book character, I feel at this stage, done convincingly, so that he really did it felt like he had power in his body, in his physique. And I think Brandon's theory of perhaps standing or sitting or moving in a certain way was to give it that kind of heroic comic book characteristic, and I think he really pulled that off, I mean, we were used to seeing guys in like fake leather outfits to sort of pretend they had muscles. That's what we'd seen in movies up till then, and Brandon had his own, he really was this guy. I mean, his body was like every piece of his physique was as tight as imaginable. It was you touch his arm and it was like touching like a rock hard thing, and he'd like gone on a special diet for this film to diminish any fat in his body down to zero, because he really wanted to bring out the sinew and the muscles, and not give himself like a bodybuilder physique, but give himself the physique that the character had in the comic book, which was all he was bone and muscle and skin. There was nothing else in there, because he was just designed to be this killing machine, and I really think he achieved that.
Kill him!
I can't remember how long it took us to shoot this scene, but we ran I think 3-4 cameras sometimes in this scene, and I would have liked to have run more, but that's all we could afford, and that was me. I think I was operating one, and it was like everyone hands-on in this sequence. Yeah, it was a very complex scene to do. You just plough through it a step at a time, and we wanted to make it feel as frenetic and as unchoreographed as possible. And I think we achieved some of that. This is John Woo Eat Your Heart Out scene. I don't think we out-wooed Woo as we were hoping to achieve at the time, but we tried to do that. We were attempting to do that, and the whole thing of like shrapnel and paper in the air constantly. I mean, where the hell does this paper come from? I don't know. I can never explain it, but it looks great, so we did it. I love slow motion at the time. It was like sort of not overused in movies now. I think it's beginning to be, but we tried to for me, I wanted a reality, and we tried to not overdo that technique more than we needed to. To me, when action is effective when you're really buying it, when you really feel like you're there and involved with all this stuff, and if it feels too artificial. You don't get that sense, you know. But at the same time, we're dealing with someone who's got hero powers and can hurl guys across the room, and you know you have to try and make that pull that off somehow. So it was difficult. This is the way Skank's demise was always designed, and we felt that it was a pathetic character, and he sort of deserved a sort of a pathetic fate, you know, whether or not we were right or wrong. I mean, at the same time as that, I think we really like Skank. You know, he became kind of our favourite in many respects, and he probably could have done with a greater death scene, but you know, it is what it is.
That's all she wrote. Move and we shoot.
Yeah, he just came up with that on the day because he was like so sick of killing people and running around and, you know, shooting guns and stuff, and he just wanted to do something totally off the wall, and I thought it was terrific. I thought it was really fun to do. Well, this scene again is we couldn't afford a real helicopter, so the helicopter is a miniature, and he's running over the same 100 yards. I know it wasn't even really 100 yards. I don't know how long it was, but maybe like 200 feet of rooftops that are being configured on a soundstage, and really all the rooftops were a series of flats that were kind of high and low, and we brought in some tanks, and the impression is he's running on rooftops, but he's just running across a soundstage floor. In that scene was, I think, entirely Brandon. I mean, the only time that we ever used doubles was if the scene was too dangerous, like a high fall from a rooftop, or if the scene was done as part of the reshoots. That end jump was definitely not Brandon. Yeah, as much as Brandon wanted to actually do those shots, and he had done those shots in other movies that he'd done in Hong Kong, etc. We weren't prepared to have him do those.
I knew you were gonna do that.
Look at that out there. Whole city ought to be in flames by now. Sky ought to be red.
So that, I take it, is the late, great Eric Draven.
He has power, but it is power you can take from him.
I like him already.
The crow is his link.
There certainly was more made of Micah's supernatural kind of side. I don't remember whether we shot any more lines or anything, but I seem to remember maybe in some incarnation of the screenplay pushing that a little further, you know.
Coming home.
This scene was definitely more improvised. It was I can't remember what was in the script, and I love that. I love that shot of Brandon with the lights on his face, smiling. I think it's great. And I just, you know, Brandon and I both love this idea that he's like, you know, on this kind of quest, and suddenly there are these kids who are, you know, it's Halloween night, and you know, these kids are just having fun, and they're not taking any of this seriously, and he's sort of swept up in all that. And I just love that close-up of him. That's why we slowed it down and froze it, because it's just such a great moment on his face.
say I shouldn't be in a cemetery in the middle of the night, right?
Safest place in the world to be.
The idea, I guess, is that, and isn't it that she knows that he's going back to the grave, or she suspects he's going back to the grave? So then she figures that she figures that it's all over for him and he's going to go back. And so in her childlike way, she decides, well, he's going to go back to the grave, and sure enough, that's exactly where he's going. I mean, the whole sort of, the sort of child's perspective of this story, I think, is really important to me because it is such a simple allegorical kind of story. I mean, it really is quite childlike in the way it's expressed, and I think comic books deal with these ideas that are, are very simplistic, and it's kind of their appeal. And so for me it's not what I'd ever call a kids movie, but it's got almost an element of that. It's seen from a childlike perspective, and I think it's this whole aspect of it is really intriguing.
I better go sneak back in the house.
The Skull Cowboy was basically an expositional device, and he was excised from the movie for many reasons. Firstly and foremostly, from my point of view, I removed him because I was never happy with the effect. I was never happy with the makeup, and I just felt that he made the film. He lowered the standard of the film, made it kind of a little cheesy, or more just didn't serve the story, but also because I felt that he was the character was kind of unnecessary. I feel that you get what's going on, you understand enough of what's going on. You don't really need someone coming out and telling you as an audience what's happening at various points, and that seemed to be the function that he was playing. And if he'd been done as this sort of incredibly cool, convincing visual effect, then it might have been a little bit more painful to remove him, but I'm kind of glad that he wasn't, and it was so easy to make that decision. And, we also didn't get to shoot. He was a character in the film. We only got to shoot one scene with him, and there were, I think, 2 other scenes planned that we actually never got to shoot. So, again, it became... how do you make more of him without Brandon to relate to him, and why would you even want to bother? So it was an easy decision to drop him, and it seems like people are kind of obsessed with this character for some reason. And believe me, there's like nothing particularly intriguing about him. That scene at the church was the only scene that we shot, and it was to happen right before this scene. And at this point, Eric is operating for the sake of the living. His mission, as far as he's concerned, his mission is over. It's not actually the case, because it turns out that Michael Wincott's character actually was the mastermind behind the events. But as far as he's concerned, his mission is done, and he should go back to the grave, and all would be fine. And because he's not operating under those rules, he is now vulnerable. He is being stripped of his powers, and the Skull Cowboy appears to tell him that is the case, that he, in fact, he does not have any of his powers, and he's walking into this situation as a mortal. Okay, to me, it's an interesting device. It was never really set up properly, and it's like, if he's mortal, why is he even walking around? He's a dead guy, So there were all sorts of question marks anyway, And so the way we'd redesigned it is that when they shoot the bird, that's when he's vulnerable. To me, that's much cleaner and simpler, and doesn't involve another character, that wasn't working anyway.
Bye-bye, Birdie.
As it was scripted, they were always going to shoot the bird. That's the reason Top Dollar and co are in the church, because they figure, because of Bai Ling's character saying, you get the bird and you get the guy, whatever the hell she says, that then he would be vulnerable. So they're actually mistaken which, again, I never really bought that. They were going to the situation foolishly thinking one thing, and it was actually not that at all. And coincidentally, the Skull Cowboy is outside the church and tells him that he's now vulnerable. So they get the bird, and all this stuff at the end is based on, in the Skull Cowboy version of the film, is based on them believing one thing and actually something completely different going on. Does that make sense? Okay. So by removing the Skull Cowboy, you make it all very clean for for the audience. Okay, so they were right. So you get the bird, you get the guy, and sure enough, that's what happens,
2 more.
This was like one of the...
I can handle it, don't worry. I'm not worried.
We shot this fairly late in the shoot, this sequence, so we were really getting the hang of the makeup. It was feeling far more organic. So it was definitely starting to work by this stage.
Bleeding all over the place. I thought, you were invincible.
I was. I'm not anymore.
Well, I guess you really will need my help, won't you? Come on. Take that.
The whole sequence in the church is quite interesting from a logistical point of view, because we didn't have a real church. We couldn't afford to build a set. There were no churches in this town that would actually allow us to stage a gunfight in them. And plus there weren't really any churches of a substantial size. It was a very small town. So the only way we managed to do this is we built, we blacked out an entire soundstage, quite a big soundstage, and we built about 4 or 5 columns and got a bunch of pews and an altar area, and just lit it with shafts of light and smoke. And that's all it is. There are no walls in that church at all. It's just a big black limbo set. So whenever you get any sense of the scale of the place, it's usually a miniature. There's a lovely symmetry to the eyeballs in the movie. Why that's there, I have no idea. But yeah, it's great that it's a classic device, I guess, that the villain who is dies, who lives by the sword dies by the sword. So whatever cruelty they're inflicting on someone, they sort of get back in excess at the end of the movie. So to me, it seemed appropriate that you would have I also like the fact that the bird actually gets its heroic moment, because it's really just this kind of entity that sort of sits in the background, and it has its moment in the sun there, pecking someone's eyeballs out. So what a perfect way for a bird to finish its movie moment.
Let her go!
This actually works quite well too. This took forever to shoot, this sequence.
All right.
Well, we thought for a Gothic extravaganza, what more appropriate way to end it than a Gothic cathedral. And I just love the idea of these guys sort of ending up on the roof and looking like almost physically resembling the gargoyles that are up on these roofs. It was a far more graphic than this originally. And I don't know how much of it's been left in the movie, because I remember cutting it every few days. We'd cut another 3 frames off it. So I can't remember where we ended up with a sequence of Top Dollar falling onto the gargoyle, but it was a rather elaborate rig, and there was a prosthetic Michael Wincott that was impaled on this gargoyle, and it was quite. I remember it being quite graphic, with a huge sort of explosion of blood coming out of this effect. And I remember seeing the footage at the time. I thought, there's no way they're going to end up with this in the finished movie.
My daddy used to say, every man's got it.
Rain is a very important element of the comic book, and it was this whole thing of it can't rain all the time, which is this expression that was used a lot in the movie. I just thought it was a great device to use, and the biggest problem we had with the rain was the birds themselves. The ravens, once their wings get waterlogged, they can't actually fly. And in fact, they don't actually like to fly in the rain. They had to be specially trained to fly across sound stages and down the street, etc., with the rain towers being turned on. They didn't want to do it. It was a major sort of problem that we had to solve. And the trainers were great. I mean, they actually managed to convince them to do that. But we had about 4 or 5 birds on the show, and they would be basically in rain scenes. They would be recycled. So as soon as one got waterlogged, they'd take it off, and so you don't see him. You don't see him land on the gargoyle. That's the key moment that I'm remembering. So that was a huge problem, and also obviously for the actors as well. It was for everyone. It was added to the difficulty and the complexity.
Go help him.
Are you alive?
God, I need a cigarette.
Brandon was he was a very gifted man.
Anybody else dead?
Not just as an actor, but as a filmmaker. I mean, he wanted to direct. I mean, we talked a lot about ideas that he wanted to make as films, and we were talking about collaborating on other projects. There was one particular project that was really dear to his heart that we were talking about possibly me directing or being involved with in some way. Dark City, I can't remember whether we ever discussed that film. I may have shown him something, but I really can't remember.
Be okay, right? Eric?
I don't actually remember specifically our first meeting with Brandon. We quickly became friends, and we hung out a lot together in LA, and we would go to places together and talk about the film. So there were a lot of we were together for a lot of the time leading up to the film, and had some great times. And so it's all become a little bit blurred. It's a little bit hard to remember exactly when the first time we met was. But I remember many times where we, he would come over to my house and I go hang out with him, and we were working on the script throughout this. We talked about a lot, watched a lot of movies. We'd go and go to like theatres out in the suburbs of LA to watch John Woo movies, and just sort of basically just hung out and got to know each other, leading up to the film, and became very good friends, There was a decision to complete this film in the wake of Brandon's death, and it was really driven by the notion that this work was important to honour his memory. He really had put a great deal of himself into this role. He really believed in this character and in the movie, and he really rose to the occasion and did a great job. And so I really felt that it was important for people to see this film, and I am happy that we completed it. And what allowed me really to get to the point where I felt we should finish this film is really the influence on that decision that Eliza, Brandon's fiancée, had, and also the actors in the film, who all felt that Brandon would have wanted this. I was really in no fit state to make an objective decision about finishing this film or not, but I really felt that Eliza and most importantly, Eliza was really the one to. I needed her permission and her blessing to do that. And as crazy as things were at that time, I feel I had enough encouragement from her to go ahead and do that. And so the film was really dedicated to Brandon, but also to Eliza, who had really suffered as much in this situation as anyone, and we felt that it was the appropriate thing to do at the time.
Do you have faith in what we believe? The truest test is when we cannot see. I hear pounding feet in the streets below, and the women are crying, and the children know that there's something wrong. It's hard to believe that love will prevail. Oh, it won't rain all the time. The sky won't fall forever. And though the night seems long, your tears won't fall forever. Oh, when I'm lonely, I lie awake at night, and I wish you were here. I miss you. Can you tell me, is there something more to believe in? Or is this all there is? And the pounding feet in the streets below, and a window breaks, and a woman falls, and there's something wrong. It's hard to believe that love will prevail. It won't rain all the time. The sky won't fall forever. And though the night seems long, your tears won't fall. Your tears won't fall. Your tears won't fall forever. Last night I had a dream. You came into my room. You took me into your arms, whispering, kissing me, and telling me to still believe. Within the emptiness of the burning sea against which we sit our darkest descent, until I felt safe and warm. I fell asleep in your arms. When I awoke, I cried again, for you were gone. Oh, can you hear me? It won't rain all the time. The sky won't fall forever. And though the night seems long, your falling faster in my car, falling farther from just what we are. Smoke a cigarette and lie some more. These conversations kill, falling faster in my car. Time to take her home. Her dizzy head is contemplating. Time to take her ride. It leaves today. No conversation. Time to take